professor and chair of the University of California, San Francisco East Bay Department of Surgery in Oakland, California, and he is the son of our founder, Dr. White Harken. Please welcome Dr. Alden Harken.
Thank you.
You look like your dad. I'm not as mean. He's a wonderful guy, and it's a thrill for me to be here. It's inspiring to see all you folks. You're doing wonderful work, and I really am impressed at what you're doing. I'm going to comment on that. I'm also going to talk about, I guess, my greatest disappointment is the fact that my father couldn't be here and see all of you folks. Because his concept and your concept of what you're doing, I've seen it in action multiple times. As I'm going to say, I've done thousands of heart operations, but I've never had one. And you folks can communicate in a way that I can't. And it's tremendously important. What I'm going to do is I want to walk you through half a dozen different components of what I'm going to say. I'm going to start off with how the Mended Hearts began, or how I think it began, or what were the incentives, stimuli to make it happen. And I'm going to try and make the case that it was a magical moment in history in which other innovations occurred. And one of those just happened to be the whole concept of groups of people reaching out and helping each other. And I think that is a formidable testimony to our ability to civilize ourselves, and I think that's what you folks are doing so beautifully. I'm going to talk briefly about what I think the Mended Hearts is, kind of what you folks already know, what empathy is. Then I want to introduce you to my dad, and I've got a couple of video clips that I've stolen out of other systems, in which he talks about 4 different major epics within cardiac surgery, many of you have gone through. And then I want to talk to you briefly about what he did early on, and how he got involved in this, and how he began to recognize the difference between people who had a heart operation and people who hadn't. And he relatively early on recognized that you folks are different. And he didn't know what it was, and I'll say, I don't know what it was, and I'm not sure you know what it was, what it is that makes that transition. But whatever it is, it's formidably constructive. And watching people work where I work and live, the team effort is extraordinary. I want to finish up. Actually, some sociologists and psychologists have done some work, some investigative scientific work about the difference between people that are pro-social, pro-outgoing, pro-helping each other, and the groups that are not. And you all know some of those folks, the folks that are interested in self-aggrandizement, getting more material goods for themselves. And what are the differences between those two groups? And finally, I'm going to finish off, and I need a lot of help with this one, so I'm going to ask you for your assistance with a song. But let me start off by walking us through what I think are remarkable events. 66 years ago, Keith Otto, Alfred Samasio, Doris Silman. I actually think I met Doris now. I was 10 at the time. So I don't remember a lot of what happened, but I do remember I got dragged out to the hospital grounds with my dad, and frequently he would leave us, my sister and me, in the car, and he'd go and make rounds on the weekends. And I learned to ride my bike in the Boston City Hospital parking lot, and my sister, when she was 2, hadn't anticipated telling this story, but She was 2, I was out riding my bike. In that era, you just let kids go. We consider it irresponsible now, but so it was hot. She took all her clothes off, and so she's standing there at 2 years old, stark staring nude, and they don't have beepers in, so they announce over the, Dr. Harken, your daughter is taking her clothes off. That got his attention. And Elizabeth Wilkinson. And so these events conspired. My dad seemed to think that there was something special about you folks, but he didn't know what it was. These guys said there is something special about us, and what we think we can do is help you help other people. And you all know you do that, and I'll talk a lot more about that. But I think there was, thinking about it took me a while to put this series of observations together. I actually think that at the end of the First World War, there was a unique phase in history in which you could take people like you, and I've always thought that luckiest people in the world are doing something that they think is important, but everybody else thinks is important too. And you know, that's you guys. You guys are awesome, or as I like to say, amazing. Our kids say awesome. You're phenomenally amazing people, and I want to amplify on that observation because it's been exhilarating for me to just be here the last 24 hours, seeing the way you people work together. And I'll talk about this a little bit at the end, the way the staff, I got here this morning early, I wanted to walk through and talk, make sure it works, and so the staff has been just great, and I had difficulty dinner with them last night, and then I saw them again working together. Every detail of what you folks have been doing has been covered by these folks, and it's really been wonderful. You all recognize this lady. I hope what you've done is read her story on the Mended Hearts website, and she talks about something I've seen, something you've all seen, something you've all done, and that's walking the patient's room. She's talking about this guy that had a single rose in a glass vase, and somehow a level of communication, a level of fluent communication that you folks understand that I've watched occurred. But as you all know, this lady is an inveterate romantic, and she comments on the fact that she goes stumbling out after her heart operations to see her husband in the patient family waiting room. And he's made a tent for himself with a hospital sheet, and he's sound asleep on the floor. And she's calling this romantic. And we're talking about a lady who can make lemonade out of lemons. There's also something I learned in preparing for this. I had the opportunity to talk to one of your vice presidents, and I learned that at the beginning of an NASCAR race, some significant member of the community gets out there and takes a big old green flag and waves it, and these cars go roaring by. And 3 or 4 months ago, I had the opportunity to meet Pat, parent, and he came up and we talked about what currently is going on with the Mended Hearts. And he had, because he'd been involved in the Mended Hearts, and the people in the community recognized what a phenomenal force this was within their community. Pat gets identified as somebody who ought to be out there waving that green flag. And so he gave me this picture. That's Pat waving the green flag. And I like to think of these cars that are roaring by right now are really just representing the Mended Hearts that are roaring into a new successful year this past year. So the epic, the magical moments in history that I think are real. I'm going to try and make the case that these magical moments permitted an environment that fostered groups like the Mended Hearts. And they were at the end of the Second World War. There really were some remarkable events. Some of them were subatomic inquiry, interplanetary travel, aid to the vanquished, societies. I think all of that permitted an environment in which you could think about developing a society that would actually, its goal would be to help other folks. And we think about the unimaginably small. And at that time, I thought, in fact, I didn't think about it. I was 10. But we at that moment, thought that the nucleus of an atom was the smallest thing that there was. And it turns out we now know there are 30 different components to the nucleus of an atom, one of which doesn't even have any mass because it's going to the speed of light, a neutrino. So by Einstein's equation, it can't have mass if it's going to the speed of light. Wow. So the unimaginably small splitting of the atom evolved into ways in which we now can both diagnose and treat disease. And France now, 60% of its energy comes from nuclear power. Interplanetary travel, unimaginably large. Again, conceptual advances that we just didn't previously have the possibility for. The idea of getting outside the world. And we began to think about it about the same time that the Mended Hearts started. And what did that get us? Well, it gets us, I mean, there's so many satellites up there now, and you can hit your GPS and try and get from your room over to here, you can follow. You can follow it every 6 feet. It's incredible. And of the thousands and thousands of planes that are up in the air, it makes it safe. Hard to believe. And we can follow components of the earth in which there are making ammonia or effective for agriculture. And it's increased the efficiency of our agricultural product orders of magnitude. But the thing that really startles me is prior to that era, when some group won a war, the victors, they vanquished the vanquished. They just bled them dry. And what happened at the end of this? Truman asked General Marshall, gets him $17 billion to build Europe back up again, arguing that a healthy economy in Europe is actually good for the United States. Whoa. And so the Marshall Plan was developed. And took that and turned it into that. And that's got to be good. So unimaginably caring, same time, 1951, what happens? You get the Mended Hearts. And I think it was a fertile soil to develop this kind of organization. And what is the Mended Hearts? Well, you know this better than I. It's clearly a group of caring people. They're caring people. You're doing more than that. You're doing something more constructive than that. What you're doing is people helping people. And the concept in a Darwinian fashion of helping yourself, everybody's known that for a long time, at least since Darwin. But people helping people, it's different. And why do you do that? What kind of altruistic spirit? Is it in our genome? Or is it in our psyche? Or why do we do it? You don't need money to help others. You need a heart to help others. And I'm going to suggest a Mended Heart's more powerful. We're about to go up, and I want to talk a little bit about empathy. We're about to go up tonight and meet our family in Chicago. We're going to drive to someplace in southern Michigan. My wife hasn't told me where yet. We're going to meet our 3 children and their spouses and 2 teenage sons, but 2 4-year-old twins. And looking at these guys, my sense is we got a couple. I'm going to see a couple of these guys tomorrow. They may not be up to any good, but they do understand each other. And that concept of understanding each other is I think, empathy. And I think it's pivotal to the empathetic process. But there's on the left, this little girl is being very sympathetic to this guy who just fell off his bicycle. He's sorry. She's sorry that he fell off his bicycle, and she's trying to make him feel better. This lady understands this lady. She's looking at her eyes, she understands what's going on. It's a different level of communication. And whether you get that by having lived the same life or talking the same language or having the same event, like a heart operation, I don't know, but all of those pathways seem to be effective in accomplishing it, but nothing teaches us better than our own experiences. And so your experiences that you had and the event you call it is a heart operation, but as Danette said so effectively in her Mended Hearts story, the doctors, the surgeons may have saved her heart, but the Mended Hearts saved her life. That's what you guys are doing. So it's a longer process. And the process of having the event, heart operation, I think kind of starts when you think, gosh, I might need one. And then gets bumped up several octaves when somebody tells you you need one. And then when they actually put your name on a schedule, whoo, now it's beginning to look progressively ominous. And so that process of going through the actual event and then recuperating afterwards, and so it's not just the heart operation, it's the whole process. And I think it's just the biological, the psychological, psychosocial process of that event, which really makes the difference. That's what teaches you the language, the fluency of communicating with somebody else who's got a heart operation, who's about to have a heart operation. And you sense it, you know it. You can go in and look at somebody in the eye and they look at you. And you say, you know, 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years or 20 years ago, I had an operation. And look at me. Wow, does that make a difference? And I can talk to you about the biology and the cardiomyocytes and stuff. But you, just looking at somebody and communicating your own shared anxieties, but also, look but how well it works. So that's what the empathetic concept is. That's where all of you folks have got that constructive linguistic fluency. And it's not just the language, it's something more. And that's what the Mended Hearts do. It's the feeling with the mended heart of another. And you do this, Gandhi said, doesn't have to be a lot of fanfare. You can do this in a gentle way. You can shake the world, and you can certainly shake somebody else's life by virtue of it in a very positive fashion. Can't help everyone. Understand that. But everyone can help someone. And so many of you have heard this analogy before, this story before. I like it because it's meaningful to me. You get these guys, 2 guys walking along the beach, a bunch of starfish out on the beach. Every once in a while, one of these guys picks up one of the starfish and throws it back into the ocean. The first guy says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, you know, tomorrow, the sun's going to come up, beat down these starfish, dry them out, and kill them." And the first guy says, "Well, you can't help all these starfish." And the first guy says, "Yeah, but I helped that one." That's what you guys are doing. And every time you walk into a patient's room, you do that. This is my dad.
Greetings. I'm Dwight Harken. It's been an exhilarating experience to collect these films and to salute these masters. I'm only saddened by the fact that they've all had to be abbreviated or, worse still, omitted. I've been urged to volunteer to do this job simply because I'm the oldest viable ambulatory heart surgeon who can claim most of these men as his personal friends. They've been touching in their responses to my request, and I'm terribly upset to have omitted so many, but we must recognize the fact that even in a well-planned trip around the world, one leaves out more marvels than one includes. Heart surgery has often been divided into 4 overlapping eras. Era 1, extracardiac surgery, where we admit patent ducti and coarctation as heart surgery, but really it's pericardial surgery, pericardiectomy, or stab wounds. Era 2, closed intracardiac surgery introduced by the removal of shell fragments in World War II, and the following valvular surgery that rendered so much to so many. Era 3, open heart surgery, perhaps initiated by hypothermia, which we'll touch upon generously, and carrying 2 mechanical heart-lung machines initiated by Jack and Maylie Gibbon. Era 4, replacement of parts or hearts, meaning valves or hearts by homographs, xenographs, or machines.
So what he did is, at one point, he knew every patient that had ever had a heart operation. Then he knew every surgeon who'd ever done a heart operation. And then it got, everybody's doing it. It was an era in which these folks were doing things that I frankly can't imagine. They didn't have the kind of military equipment that we have now. They didn't have any of the drugs that we've got now. They didn't have any of the laboratory values that we bank on right now. And it's, much of it is it's so automated, it's so standardized, it's so good right now. It wasn't then. And so it took, everybody talks about the courage of the surgeons, the courage of the patient, as you folks know. And when I started out doing some of the rhythm problem surgery, I remember this was 78. We developed a strategy, we thought, of a patient came into our coronary care unit that had a heart attack, and every day or so he would go into one of these fast rhythms, and we had to shock him back into a regular rhythm. And basically he couldn't leave an intensive care unit. And Mark Josephs, an electrophysiologist, and I, surgeon, thought, simple surgeon, if we can figure out where these extra heartbeats are coming from, simple surgeon, what do? You cut them out. And so we decided that we would try that. A HIPAA violation, I'll tell you, the guy's name was Fran Andrews, and I walked into Fran's room and said, Mr. Andrews, you've got a problem. And he said, I know. We've had to resuscitate you at least once a day for the past week. He said, yeah, it's been a trial. And I said, well, I think you got something we can do. We've got this electrical system there where we think we can figure out where these extra heartbeats are coming from, and we can excise them surgically. He said, sounds pretty good. How many times have you done it before? How many times has anybody done it before? And he said, go ahead. That's the courage. And I can't imagine that level of courage or that amount of psychological turmoil that must be going on in somebody's mind like that. And I'm going to bring that up again and again in a second. But many of the surgeons that did some of the early innovative things, actually, they didn't video them in that. They took 16mm movies of them, which I remember as a little kid, I was the projectionist for some of these things, and the movie was always breaking. And I had to learn how to refeed it back into and splice it back together again. But now it's converted over to videos. And so many of the early pioneers, he did this back in the 1990s, had succumbed. And so, he said, these guys are toughing each other. His letter to each of them was, Dear Dick, or Dear Mike, or Dear somebody, pretty soon you're gonna die. Why don't you send me the videos of that? I'll put them together in a compendium of the pioneers in cardiac surgery. So that's what he did. That's what the origin of this was. And I'm going to come back to that in just a second. So he then went over to England in 1939. Prior to the U.S. In being involved in the Second World War, he'd gotten his medical school education, his college medical school, and then very little surgical training. Went over, he wanted to be a thoracic surgeon. thoracic meaning everything that's in your chest, so your heart and lungs and swallowing tube and esophagus. That's what he wanted to do. Why he wanted to do it's not obvious to me, but he did. And so in that era, the major problem for heart surgery was getting your valves infected. And as he's about to tell us, he and a couple of other people developed these strategies of looking inside your heart, poking a tube inside your heart, so you could scrape these big infected clots off your valves. Well, then he's going to tell us in a minute how penicillin came along, and that probably solved itself. But before he did that, he was over in England, and these soldiers would come back from France with bullets in their heart, or in their, this guy got shot twice, obviously, maybe more, we can't see that. But he's got one bullet's probably not going to hurt him, but another bullet that might. And so he took 133 of these folks and put them through a heart operation in which he pulled these bits of bullet or shrapnel out of either around their hearts or, in many instances, inside their hearts. That had not been done before. And he did it with incredibly primitive equipment and support. And so that was the first elective. People had been stabbed in the heart before, and surgeons had taken the opportunity to try and stem the tide, but nobody had ever done elective. Look, we're going to operate on you and see if we can't do this. And he did it without any mortality, which was really remarkable. This is the post-operative ICU. Looks different than it did today. It's kind of an army cot. There's no ventilator. There's a couple of tubes. I must say, I like to look. This is the nurse. They still wear hats, caps, and this is a hairdo you probably won't see today. At least I don't see it in the audience here. And so what he did is he took made hearts out of these bullet things. And when he did that, he then came back after the war and with the idea that it was possible to electively select people that had a cardiac problem and fix it. Didn't have cardiac pulmonary bypass at this point, so you couldn't stop the heart. The patient had to keep their own heart going the whole time. So when they did that, he recognized in that era, and still, but it's much less common now, patients, typically women in their 30s, would develop some extra calcifications on their hearts, on their valves, that would stiffen the valves up so that they couldn't get blood from the top part of their heart into the pumping chamber of the heart. That blood would back up into their lungs, fill their lungs with fluid, and make it so that just sitting in a chair or walking around, their cardiac output, their amount of blood their heart's pumping was insufficient, and the flooding of their lungs would make them very short of breath. And so he developed a technique in which he put his finger in through a part of the heart, put a suture around it so it didn't bleed, and he put his finger into the heart valve and break it back open again. And when you did that, essentially you got instantaneous, dramatic increased efficiency of your heart. Your heart would double its cardiac output if the blood is pushing out. And so what would then happen is he took a bunch of these patients.
That may be hard to identify. He had the idea of doing heart surgery before World War II. In fact, he wanted to correct the most lethal of infectious diseases, bacterial endocarditis.
That's the
developed a cardioscope and then a resectoscope, and was about to try to resect these by closed surgical techniques. But World War II intervened, and two things happened. Penicillin was released, and the bacterial endocarditis.
So what he then did is he comes back and he says, okay, there's not a problem with infected clot on your heart valves, but there is a problem of what we refer to as mitral stenosis. Mitral stenosis, this means the mitral valve is stenosed. It's too closed. Normally the valve opens up luxuriously, blood gets taken from the left atrium down to the ventricle, and you can increase your cardiac output. You run up a flight of stairs and your heart doubles. But these ladies, typically, 30-year-old ladies, typically, they would demonstrate the problem, first have the problem and get pregnant. When you're supposed to double your cardiac output, they couldn't do that, and they really had trouble. And they, by this point, were unable to walk across the room. They were breathing hard, just sitting in a chair, because they were flooding their lungs. So what he was able to do is put his finger in, break up that heart valve, open it back up again, and then instantaneously, once they got over the operation, they were better. So he took them, he was a showman. The other guy that did this, a guy named Charlie Bailey in Philadelphia, and he and my dad developed this completely independently and did the first one days apart in June of 1948. They were incredibly competitive and not particularly nice to each other. And he used to talk about Bailey as Barnum and Bailey. But he was the showman. And so, but he would take these ladies after a week of doing these operations, and he'd march them down to the bottom of the stairs. And he'd say, now walk up those stairs. And they'd say, there's no way I can do that. And I actually remember watching this, and they would go up the stairs.
Now we look at normal valves through Ian Macmillan, the English surgeon's pulse duplicator, the National Institutes of Heart.
That's a normal valve. That's an aortic valve.
To go back to England shortly after the war.
Look at that valve. It's just, you could read a newspaper through some of that. That valve deals with, in a lifetime, about 3 billion heartbeats. It doesn't wear out. Incredible. But if you take those leaflets, those commissures there, and stick them together with calcium, all of a sudden that heart has a huge amount of additional work it has to do, and eventually the muscle fails. And you demonstrate that by both fatigue and shortness of breath. So he'd take these ladies to the bottom of the stairs, and what that valve had to do, I like this as an example. This is kind of your cardiac output here. What the valve has to do is prevent any of this sloshing back, mitral or aortic valvular insufficiency, or permit the forward flow, preventing mitral stenosis. So that valve does that. And there are multiple different prosthetic valves we can stick in, but what he was doing was just using the normal autologous valve, the valve that native valve, and opening up the commissures. When he did that, there was a dramatic here, there at the bottom of the stairs.
These were done 6 and 7 days previously. They could not climb stairs. They could barely walk. You see them climbing the stairs. They're all happy and not dismayed. The beautiful nurse at the top of the stairs is the famed Scotty Fosberg, first nurse perfusionist.
So this wasn't all just show, although a lot of it was. But he loved this kind of event. And the patients were very grateful. And indeed, I remember seeing some of these ladies burst into tears at the top of the stairs. That's powerful. However, the next step, of course, was the heart-lung machine, which almost all of you probably benefited from. Again, a reasonably simple, complex concept. This is the pump part of it. Looks fancier than it is. This is just a pump, and that's pretty easy. The real trouble was oxygenating blood. And if you think about it, which most of us don't, I didn't, the blood-air interface in your lung right now is the size of a singles tennis court. It's huge. And to mechanically reproduce that, phenomenally hard. But a guy named Gibbon, Jack Gibbon, and his wife Melee, did it in the late 50s and created this kind of heart-lung machine. And I'm now going to steal something, a video from the BBC. When we did some of the early ventricular arrhythmia study, and I got invited, I got invited over to the BBC to go to London and participate in putting together a special that they had on cardiac surgery. And part of that was what I'm about to show you, which was not what I did, but I thought it was particularly interesting. So
he assembled the best team he could.
My role in the operation was I was in charge of the machine, along with Joanne Crothers. And we had to be sure that everything worked well with the machine. That was my primary concern. And I remember very vividly wheeling this huge machine, which was about the size of a baby grand piano, through the hallways from the research laboratory into the operating room.
On May the 6th, 1953, 18-year-old Cecilia Bavalek was brought into theatre. When Gibbon opened her chest, he discovered her heart was massively enlarged, clear signs of a serious problem. The vessels to her heart were clamped shut and her blood diverted to the machine. Cecilia was now being kept alive by Gibbon's invention.
He was then able to see this hole in her heart in the upper chambers, the size of a silver dollar. As the surgery proceeded, it was going along fairly well. Suddenly, catastrophe struck. Suddenly, the blood began to build up, and we could see the blood beginning to froth, bubbles forming and starting to go towards the top of the lung. And it was getting ready to spill out. And I remember jumping up on a stool, trying to hold the lid down on top.
The blood inside the artificial lung was clotting and blocking the exit tubes.
I was afraid the pressure might grow up so much that it would blow the whole top of the artificial lung off. Then you'd have blood all over the operating room and you'd have the patient losing all their blood. Dr. Gibbons turned around to Dr. Miller and said, "BJ, get out there and do something." And of course, he was really the mechanical brains behind this artificial heart and lung. And so he dropped out of the operation, came over, cut off the circulating machine, therefore giving the amount of blood back she needed and getting her the oxygen she needed.
As quickly as he could, Gibbon closed the massive hole inside her heart and finished the operation. Incredibly, Cecilia survived.
So that was the innovation that all of you have benefited from, and now it is clearly a vastly, it's no longer the size of a Mended piano, but it's got so many safety measures inserted into it, so it's almost impossible to do something bad, although some of us work out strategies of accomplishing that anyway, but typically it really has made the operation where you can now stop the heart and reorient things for a couple of hours, and it works incredibly well, as all of you attest. So what did that mean? That meant that we're back to why the mended hearts are so important. And obviously it's great to be alive, that's important, but the real advance, I think, was the whole concept of helping others, and that's what you guys do. And what we've learned is that how do you make yourself feel good? And the best feeling practice is when you're happy because you made somebody else happy. You guys know that. This is the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and they've actually written a book together about this. And they're good friends. And they both never met them, but they must be incredibly nice people. But they've spent their lives trying to figure out how to make the world a happy place. And their conclusion, which is no surprise to you, is when we give joy to others, we experience joy ourselves. And we see people that are of the whole spectrum, from sad to happy. But buried down deep in our national birthright, I suppose, is this whole concept of we're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, those being life, which is having a successful heart operation, and liberty, which is the opportunity to join a group like Mended Hearts, and pursuit of happiness, which is helping somebody else. So if you want to be happy, it's actually, you guys stimulated me to think about this more than I ever have before. I forget when you guys initially said, hey, we'd like to have you drop by and talk to the Mended Hearts. And you did it long enough in advance that I figured, what the heck, I'll never come. I have to come and worry about that. And then eventually got closer and closer. And geez, maybe it's gone. So I thought about, if you want to be happy for an hour, what do? Take a nap. You want to be happy for a day, what do? Yeah, go fishing. You want to be happy for a year, what do? Inherit a lot of money. Oh, sorry. But if you want to be happy for your life, what do? And money. Yeah, others. So I want to step back and tell you a little bit more about the rest of my family. My grandfather lived, actually both my grandparents lived in Camp Osceola, Iowa. And my grandfather thought that Osceola was the center of not just the country or the world, but the universe. And he, us Harkens tend to be a little megalomaniac. And so, so he got that gene to my dad, honestly. And so he grew up in Des Moines, I grew up in Osceola, and went to high school in Osceola. And this is the early high school of Osceola. And it wasn't a single-room schoolhouse. There were 3 rooms in there for kindergarten through high school. And I think you can probably make out some of the, I guess these are the kindergarten, early grade groups. And this is, there's some high schoolers in here, a couple teachers maybe over here. But grandfather graduated from this place. What am I going to do? He didn't really have any good ideas. There weren't, he didn't know what he wanted to do. So he figured out this new book called the Encyclopedia Britannica. So he went around selling the Encyclopedia Britannica for a year and a half. And at night, didn't watch television because there wasn't any television. And Osceola only got one chance station on the radio, so he read the Encyclopedia Britannica, a year and a half. And at that time, he says to himself, this isn't me. I think I'd like to be a doctor. So he goes up to Des Moines, takes the Iowa State medical exam. He'd never gone to college, never went to medical school, passes it. Comes back to Osceola. And next 55 years, he practices medicine in Osceola, Iowa. Now he took on a little of the attributes of the local folks. He had, at one point, I heard 200 head of Aberdeen Angus cattle. I don't think he did much with them, but he had them. But he was pretty conscientious, and this is not the hospital, but it's what I remember it was. I'd been there on multiple occasions, and the hospital, as you walked in the front door, the first floor was the pharmacy. And it had that incredibly astringent smell of a pharmacy. You knew it was clean, but boy, was it irritating. And on the second and third floors were where the patients stayed if they had to stay overnight. And the family lived in the basement. And the unique feature of this is that he had an umbrella stand on the door on the way out. And when you walked out, what you did is you put what you thought the visit was worth into the umbrella stand. The billing coding is a little different now. And he used to get bushels of peaches, and occasionally for a good visit he'd get a hog. But it was none of this insurance stuff, and nobody cared about pre-existing disease. But he also was pretty conscientious about keeping up his medical education, became the medical director of the local railroad. So he'd go up to, from Osceola to Chicago, And once a month or so, he'd take some courses, so he kind of stayed current, and he was pretty conscientious about that. Delivered both my parents. And that was his message, that what you needed to do was just stay practical, and he was very practical. I made some house calls with him. We'd drive out to somebody's house. And they have a dirt driveway, but he never used it. He drove right on the front lawn. And he'd go over, and as we walked in, he'd say, "Let me tell you what's going to happen. George is going to say, my back hurts. And Millie's going to say, yeah, but that's because you don't get any exercise. And George is going to say, oh, come on, stop talking about that. I do all the work at the front. Oh, my Millie." We'd go inside, and it was as if he'd written the script. Exactly. He knew these people so well. He knew 3 and 4 generations of them. He knew stuff that the families didn't know. That level of communication was, I think, incredibly valuable. Well, so, Dad, this is him at the end of the Army at a time in which he actually made some, I think, significant contributions. The whole concept of elective intra-pericardiac surgery was, but it used to drive him bananas that he finished up, those of you who's been in the Army, he was a captain at the end of it. 1967, I finished medical school and was drafted into the Army. But they needed surgeons at the time, and I was in a surgical training program, so they wanted me 5 or 6 years from now, not now. So I kept in my surgical training, and about every once a year and a half, I'd get a letter saying, if you can think of a reason we shouldn't promote you, write us back. When I wrote back. So I kept getting promoted. And finally, 1973, the time comes, I go in with all the docs that are going to be enlisted in the Army that year. So 300 of us docs show up at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. It's 105 degrees outside. The docs are sitting there in air-conditioned comfort watching the Green Berets run by in formation. Woo. So they tell us to go out and get ourselves in alphabetical order. 5 minutes later, they come out, we're in alphabetical order. They can't believe it. Now march. Whoa, we couldn't do that. But I love to tell Dad and those other people, I got through basic training. Let me tell you, I spent a week in basic training. And at the end of basic training, they promoted me to a major. Frosted, my father. This is, Dad came home from the leave, and this is the first time I met him. And it didn't look like I'm all that impressed. In fact, the observation that this made is that I look a little bit more like Winston Churchill. And then the folks in my office put a couple slides in that I tried to take out, and they wouldn't let me take them out. This is, he came back a couple years later. This is the second time I met him. Interesting, he, in this, I'm not sure what the communication level is here. It's clearly not the same as what you guys were able to accomplish in a hospital room. I look kind of dazzled, and he looks like he's trying to teach me something about something much more complex than I'm capable of dealing with. But up here is a sculpture. And it's a flamenco dance. You can't see it very well, but he was a gifted sculptor. And he almost became an artist instead of a surgeon. Decided not to for a reason that I don't understand, but then my staff put a couple slides in that I wish they hadn't. This is me. And here we are. This is grandfather, Dad, and me. And they were, my folks were tremendously supportive of me, but they also had very high expectations, which was a problem because I wasn't too interested in those expectations, especially as a teenager. But I get out of the 8th grade middle school, and they decide that they want me to go to a more challenging high school. I didn't know what that was, and I probably would have resisted it had I known, but I just kind of went along. But in order to go that way, you take an IQ test. Well, one of my teachers in elementary school thought, oh, it's going to be a problem, because I've never taken one of those multiple choice exams before. And those ones where you get the 4 little ellipses and you got to take a number 2 pencil and fill in one of those. And my teacher was trying to help me, wanted to give me some sense of what these things were. So he goes off and gets the 1943 IQ test exam. That night, my sister and my folks, I don't know what they were doing. They weren't at home. And we didn't have a television at the time, and so we just asked these questions back and forth, just kind of for fun, just nothing else to do. And so the next day, my teacher was worried that I would be intimidated because everybody else taking this exam, they were old. I mean, they were 20 and 30 years old. They were old. And I was 13. And I walk in with my dungarees, my t-shirt, and they all got suits and ties, and it was intimidating. And this lady kind of school marches up on a desk in front, and she hands everybody out a manila envelope and 2 number 2 pencils. And we go back to our tables, and I'm kind of looking around, and she says, open them up. We're going to give you a half hour to complete this. And an IQ test, I don't know if they're taking one of those things. I'm not sure they do it anymore. But at this stage, what you did is they weren't complex questions. They were, if you had 2 chickens, and the chickens could lay an egg every other day, how many eggs do you have at the end of 2 weeks? Given enough time, everybody has no trouble figuring that out. But they want to know, so this lady in the front says, don't expect anybody to finish this. There are 200 questions. We get there, open up my envelope, and the 1956 exam was exactly the same as the 1943 exam. I didn't even have to read this question. I just bing, 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 bing. 15 minutes. I'm through. I'm waiting. But I didn't, kids that age, they don't wait very well. And so finally, I go take my exam, and I walk up to the front of the room, and this nice lady, she turned out to be oh my gosh, she didn't think I understood what the test process was. I could get you more time. He said, no, I'm through. So in that era, it wasn't computer corrected. They had these templates with the holes in them. She takes my exam. She flops the wow. I've never gotten that look ever again. But I got an IQ of 192. I had an opportunity to take some subsequent. I have said, I don't need that. I'll just rest on whatever I had before. I can probably improve it. No, so getting back to the birth of Mended Harken, and why do you folks exist? What are you doing that's so important? And I must say, I think what it is you see the world of the people that you're talking to. You're non-judgmental. You appreciate who they are. You understand their feelings. Gosh, you understand their feelings because you've been there. And you communicate to them in a fluent language that they understand. Wow, very effective. So the power of empathy is huge. The constructive power of empathy is huge. So empathy is seeing with the eyes of somebody else what you do, listening to the ears of somebody else what you do, and feeling with the mended heart of another. So I looked into this. I hadn't anticipated doing that when you guys first asked me to talk about this. And I thought maybe somebody's looked into the kind of science of this. And the social psychologists have. And what they did a couple of experiments, kind of innovative experiments. They took a group of people that they thought were interested in self-aggrandizement and developing rewards for themselves, versus people like you who are always looking to the other person to try and help that other person. Are those different kinds of people? And their argument was they are. Well, can we test this? And I thought they could. So what they did is they took a bunch of balloons. This was their test. And they put 500 people on, they had a whole bunch of these balloons. They took these 2 sets of balloons and they put 500 Mended Hearts names on each one of these balloons. So each balloon got a single name. They put 500 hedge fund investors on the others. They then put 500 Mended Hearts in one room, 500 hedge guys in the next room, 500 balloons over there, 500 balloons over there. They let them into the 2 rooms simultaneously. And when they let them into the rooms simultaneously, the goal was everybody's supposed to get a balloon that's got their own name on it. And what the Mended Hearts did, the hedge fund guys, end of half an hour, 9% of them have got a balloon with their name on it. End of half an hour, 94% of the Mended Hearts have got their balloon with a name on it. Whoa, what's the difference? What's going on? The hedge fund guys grab a balloon, not mine, let it go back up. No, not mine, let it go back up. Mended Hearts, grab a balloon. That's done. Let me go find that. Gives her a balloon. You guys are helping each other. They come out 94%. That's a huge difference in the way you think. Wow. So that, I think that not only was there a transformation, I'm not sure a transformation, I think it's an education of what's fundamentally wired into your genome anyway. But you contribute to the community in a very constructive fashion. And you do that promoting joy in another person, but it's reciprocal. You get some of it back too. Empathy is patiently and sincerely seeing the world through the other person's eyes. And it's not learned in school. It's cultivated over a lifetime or over events in that lifetime. And this guy would have been so proud to see all of you folks here today, knowing that he participated in what you're doing. Now, what I think he did is he gave the initial shove, and then you folks have taken over. And the organization and the commitment and the family concept that I see here is so inspirational. And to know that you're going to go back to your own communities and not only continue to do what you're doing, and I tell you, as one of the perpetrators of what you went through, if a patient understands what is going to happen to them and can participate in that therapeutic process, is what you folks help them do. Let me tell you, it's not in the textbooks, but they do better. They do much better. And that's what you folks are doing. And it's so valuable. And so, it's great to be alive. It's great to help others. My favorite poem, Laugh and the World Laughs With You, Ellie Wheeler Wilcox. Weep when you weep alone, you should know that. Sing and the hills will answer. Sigh and it's lost in the air. You go in there with a positive attitude. And it's infectious. And they understand that. So now I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to need your help. I'm going to test whether you're willing to help me. I want you to help me now. Help me! Of my heart, I love that melody. Heart of my heart, brings back those memories when we were kids on the corner of the street. We were rough and ready guys, but oh how we could harmonize. The heart of my heart, and friends were dearer than two that we had.
Wow, that was worth the whole trip to come here. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to go right into the next award, and if you will just remain right there, Dr. Harken. It's my special treat to present the 2017 Harken Award. As a reminder, this award is awarded once every 2 years to an individual or organization for excellence in the field of cardiovascular medicine. The award is named in honor of the father of mended hearts, pioneer heart surgeon and preeminent cardiologist, Dr. Dwight Henry Harken. Today's winner, or this year's winner, joins a prestigious list of past recipients. Today's winner is no exception to this league of outstanding leaders. He graduated from Case Western Reserve Medical School, where he completed surgical and pediatric cardiovascular surgical residencies at the Peter Benbrigham Hospital and Boston Children's Medical Center. After 3 years as an investigator at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, he joined the faculty of the University of Pennsylvania. During his 8 years there, he published more than 100 scientific papers, was awarded 2 NIH grants, and was quickly advanced to the rank of professor of surgery. In 1983, he accepted the position of chair of the Department of Surgery at the University of Colorado's Health Sciences Center. After 2 enormously successful decades in Denver, he accepted his current position as professor and chair of the University of California, San Francisco East Bay Department of Surgery. His interest in and contributions to the field of cardiac electrophysiology began early in his illustrious career when, as an assistant professor of surgery, he, along with doctors Mark Josephson and Leonard Horowitz, performed the seminal work in mapping and surgical ablation for ventricular tachyarrhythmias. The fruits of this groundbreaking labor form the cornerstone of our current understanding of the pathophysiology of ventricular tachycardia and have provided the basis for today's methods of ablative treatment of ischemic ventricular tachycardia. He was one of the early investigators in the implantation of implantable tachyarrhythmia devices and became one of the foremost experts in the surgical treatment of supraventricular tachyarrhythmias. He has authored over 500 scientific publications, been awarded 10 NIH grants, and has served as the director of the American Board of Surgery and the American Board of Thoracic Surgery, a regent of the American College of Surgeons, and president of the Society of University Surgeons and the Association of Academic Surgery. It is my great honor to announce and present the recipient of the 2018 Harken Award to none other than Dr. Alden Harken, son of Dr. Harken. What an honor to have him here. This is just a delight. Oh, wow. Super. Wow. Okay. I wanted to announce, and you probably already heard, that our next conference, or the one in 2018, will be in San Antonio, Texas. So be planning for that for next year. We've had one in San Antonio before. It was wonderful, great success, and we really enjoyed it. They have the best barbecue ever. And please never forget how important you are to this organization. Wow, this just makes me want to get out there and do more, just after hearing this presentation from Dr. Harken. It's just, it means so much to me, and I know it does to you. So this should regenerate us and invigorate us to go out and want to do more. And